What is up, everybody? Welcome back to Pause, and today we are going to be going on to the exterior of the Snow Leopard house. This is probably going to be the most cinematic area in the whole sanctuary, but I hope you enjoy nonetheless. Let's jump in. That is right. Welcome back to Pause. The consistency is really starting to go now. And welcome back. I hope you enjoy it. And thank you so much for your support on the last two videos as well. Really nice comments on both the Bengal tiger and the interior to the Snow Leopard habitat. But of course, now we're going on into the big wide outside. And I went into this with a couple of references. Cologne Zoo was sort of one of my primary ones. The whole thing that I wanted was when you stood in front of this big wide window, I wanted you to sort of get the scale that you were halfway up a mountain. So when you're standing there, I wanted you to have like a downward view, not necessarily accessible to the snow leopards, but then I wanted you to have this sense of grandeur and a taller habitat. So that's exactly what we're working on here. We dig out this trench and start using some of the old concrete walls just to obviously like neaten all this up so you don't have the wall showing through. And yeah, we end up putting water in here, but you'll see a little bit later on what I end up doing with that. But there's going to be a lot of rock in here. That is going to be the main thing. Like I say, the whole point is that I want this to be emulating a mountain ridge, as it were. Obviously that's predominantly where you would find snow leopards. That's where they do a lot of their, it's where they live a lot of their daily life. I think they've got a nickname of something like the ghosts of the mountain or something like that. But that could just be like a local thing where they are natively found. But yeah, like I say, this is the first of very, very heavy rock work. End up using, I was going to use a different type of rock, but I think I end up preferring this color. But the first things first is I wanted to be able to link up the outdoors with the indoors. So obviously that log that you've got coming out of that wall, that's going to be where the interior gets led to. But then I just start working on the shape and working out where the snow leopard is actually going to be able to traverse in this habitat, and then just sort of tidy up little areas here and there, and just trying to get a good shape of the habitat, because as per when you're standing in front of this window, I want you to be able to have a really good view of pretty much everything in this habitat. Now, it might not seem like I'm using a huge variety of rocks right now, but again, like I say, I'm just trying to get the shape, and then what I end up doing is I end up tilting a lot of rocks just to start giving them a better view. If the rocks were flat to the world axis, then obviously when they were be at the back of the habitat, the likelihood of being able to see them from the window is going to be next to zero. So the whole thing I'm doing here is just really trying to angle these rocks toward the window so that wherever the snow leopards are in the habitat, you're going to be able to see them. And in this bit on the right here that I'm currently working on, this is going to be where the keepers are going to be able to enter. Now, like I said, this is heavily inspired by Cologne Zoo, but at the same time, it isn't. The premise is supposed to be the same. When I went to Cologne, I really did get the feeling that when I was at the snow leopard habitat that I was in, I don't know, it was quite immersive, really. It did feel like I was in their world, as it were. But here I've just stolen the waterfall from the clouded leopard. It's probably one of my favorite things in the whole zoo. So I thought, you know what, let's make it a bit more interesting. Let's add it to the snow leopard habitat. And yeah, really happy with how it turned out, because then obviously I end up putting the water in. I'm trying to get it all looking pretty nice, so it's like bouncing off of the rocks as it cascades down. And yeah, absolutely amazing. Suits it really well. It doesn't detract too much away from the attention of the rest of the habitat. It's just a nice little feature, and I think it works really well when you consider that you've got the interior waterfall as well on the right hand side. But again, I really highly encourage you that when you're building stuff like this, to constantly jump into the explorer view and just keep checking the perspective from the guests. That's the only way that you're going to know that this is looking how you want it to from ground level. It's all good and well trying to build from this top down sort of view, but you really don't have an idea until you jump down to into a player level, as it were. which is something I've actually found myself doing quite a lot recently. I do cut a lot of this out and stuff like that, but a lot of what you don't see is me building in the actual first person camera, because I don't know. I think it's because the last episode I was building for the interiors, and if I was using the free camera, then the likelihood of me clipping through the ceiling and having to keep working my way back inside the building would have just got too infuriating. So I think I just kept everything at a ground level. But even then, I was hitting stuff and flying up through the ceiling, so it's not always foolproof at the end of the day. And here we're starting to build up the back of the habitat. This is where the grandeur is going to come from. I do want there to be trees poking through at the back, but here you see me jumping straight into the first person again and just building up this back wall. Looks a little bit repetitive at first, but then I start working on the shape of the habitat, so I want it to go round the back here and swizzle back round to the entrance for the keepers. Again, this gets a lot of work. This right hand side here transforms. I do end up using snow rocks as well. It's not something I've done so far, but I think they work really well in this habitat. But after this, I end up placing the viewing dome that you saw me put in the last episode as well. I finally find somewhere where I kind of want to have it, but I wasn't entirely happy, so I do extend upon that later on. But while I end up doing extensive rock work in the background, just going to say right now, we're going to be covering a few housekeeping bits as well. Now, the first and foremost thing is that when I have been walking around the sanctuary, I've noticed that a lot of my staff are still rocking the default uniform colours, and I wanted to ask you guys what you thought our uniform colours should be. Whether you want to create a palette for all different staff types, or whether you think that we should have a primary colour that we are recognised for. Feel free to let me know. I'd love to see what you guys think. And secondly is that we still have a poll going on in the community tab for which of the two new cats you want to see me build for first, the Palace cat or the African leopard. It's very tight the last time I checked, so please make sure you get your votes in there now. And I have been doing some future proofing for the sanctuary, just getting ready for these two new arrivals as well, but I'll be showing that off at the end of the episode. Now, the rocks, the faux rock piles that I've been using, I was going to use those, but I thought to myself, you know what, they probably don't actually work as well as I want them to. So here I am just stacking a bunch of the temple rubble pieces together, just because I liked that they were more jagged. It felt more in keeping with this habitat as a whole. And to be totally honest with you, I am super glad that I did use these, because that variance in texture, where you've got such a smooth rock texture going on all the time here, using these temple pieces just to give it some jagged, sharp edges in places, I think it actually, A, ironically blends all the rock together a lot nicer, and B, it's just a different texture. That's something you always want to be thinking about when you're doing these things. You want to be looking at different textures, different color variants. So obviously you see me using the I think these are temperate rocks here as the main base of this whole place, but then I'm using obviously the rubble pieces, and then where the water is coming out of the waterfall, we are obviously using some different types of rock. You can see there it's got like a slightly greenish tinge to it, where it might be a little bit more mossy. And speaking of greens, I just start going absolutely, well, not crazy with the foliage, but the usual stuff. Creosote bushes. I use a lot of crowberry bushes as well. Crowberry bushes and the caribou moss, just to coat some of the rocks as well. Just to start getting a little bit of green in here, a little bit of pop. I don't want to go too heavy with the foliage, because obviously I understand it's supposed to be emanating halfway up a mountain, and you might not necessarily find an abundant amount of foliage halfway up a mountain. So I do try and go kind of easy on it. And using these bramble pieces as well. I don't know why I've started using these. I used to hate these when the game first came out, because I didn't like their render distance, but I think P.A.W.S has got to a point where the render distance on everything is just kind of so poor that I might as well just use them anyway. But again, it's a different shade of green. The creosotes offer a lighter green, whereas these offer a more darker green, and they're more, it's a different texture as well. Like the creosote bushes are more sort of fluffy, these look quite thorny and brambly. And then we add in a couple of trees as well, not too many. I think there's about 3 in here all in all, but it's just to help break up your sight lines at the end of that. That's all they serve to do. Instead of having this huge area that you should be scanning for the snow leopards, I'm hoping that when you put these trees in, it means that you sort of look in about 3 or 4 places where the snow leopards could be, and if they're not there, then the likelihood is that they're either hiding or indoors. So it just makes it a little bit easier to look around the habitat that way. Now, something didn't quite feel right about this habitat, and I eventually worked out what it was, and there was no backdrop. So when you're standing there in the viewing gallery, you've literally just got this sheer rock wall. So I go along and I bump up all of the terrain behind the habitat and just start spamming down some oak trees. I even start spamming down some of the pine trees just to keep the theming extending beyond the habitat, just so it kind of makes it look like the habitat is actually bigger than it is, because the theming is extending beyond where it should be. So just a lot of heavy trees here, just to give it a base over the back and hide the awful map skirt that this map has. Speaking of map skirts, I have begun work on P.A.W.S.'s follow-up. Really excited to bring you guys that. I'm not going to be saying too much about it just now, but I'm going to be dropping a teaser in the next few weeks, and hopefully by then we'll know when the DLC is coming out and I can start building for them and start getting P.A.W.S. actually finished. But yeah, really happy. And yeah, the clue there is that map skirt is the word that triggered me to talk about it in this segment. So really exciting stuff. And we start getting some climbing in here, of course. I do love giving some of my big cats some climbing. I think they really, as much as climbing is very janky in this game, I still think it makes for really nice viewing by guests when you see the animals climbing all over this stuff. I do end up changing the log at the front here. You can't quite see it, but at the front of the habitat, as you look out the window, there's a log that goes up. But I then realised that the staff traversable area is probably not that great, so I end up replacing the log with the flat panel, and I believe that it's a lot more traversable now. But then just more foliage, that's just what it's going to be, or a rinse and repeat of rock, foliage, and a little bit of detail in here and there. But really wanted to play around with the elevations in this habitat, really. Obviously your lead up to this area is quite flat, and the building itself is quite flat. So when you walk in and you see this, I don't know what you call it, like a structure, if that's really what you want, the word you want to use, but when you see all these different height variations, I really hope that it gives you that sort of immersive feel that I've been going for. And then I jump on over to the viewing dome. The viewing dome, I wasn't originally going to do it here, I'm going to be honest. I was sort of second guessing myself after I placed it, because I just couldn't find somewhere to put it. Because the whole habitat is built on a slant, it made it very awkward to be able to place the viewing dome. But I thought to myself, do you know what, let's give people a little bit of exclusivity. Some of the other habitats obviously have it with the lodge overlooking the cougar habitat. That gives you a view that you might not see unless you'd paid for a certain experience, or you know, being able to get up close and personal with, say, like the Snow Leopard. That's got like an area that's segmented off if you hadn't purchased a certain type of experience. And I thought, you know what, we'll do something similar here as well. So the only way that you'll be able to see this portion of the habitat is if you was to buy a experience for the Snow Leopard dome. So I think having these little experiences is like really important in keeping the consistency across the sanctuary when I've done it in other areas as well. But once this area is all rocked up, we then obviously move on to the foliage. And again, just keeping the palette consistent. More bramble bushes, more creosote bushes. I bring the snow rocks over here as well. You haven't seen me place those because that was sort of something I just cut out. It was more rock work. But when I'm placing the snow rocks, I will actually show it in this portion of the video. There's something strange about these snow rocks. Now, number one, I really like the sound that they make when you place them. And number two, when you're placing them inside other rocks, the way that the snow shows through the cracks and the textures of the other rocks looks absolutely amazing. Like, I don't know how Frontier have managed to do it, but I think that's just a testament to the texture of the rocks that they've added to the base game. That you've got these little divots and cracks in the rock that allow that when you put a snow rock inside of it, that they just show through, and it just keeps things from being a blanket of white, and instead it's like a patchiness, as if you're working your way down from the top of a mountain, which is again the look I was going for. So Frontier's rock models have absolutely smashed it out of the park, and I hope Planet Coaster's rock models also do the game justice. Now this bit in front of where I'm building now, there's like a piece of mesh fence that curves around here. I was going to do a path that came down here, but then I thought, number one, guests aren't going to be able to actually see into this area because it's too like the actual ground is too low. But then I thought to myself, I looked back and I was like, this is actually incredibly close to where I'm going to be building for the African leopard. So I don't want to have two habitats too close to each other. The habitats probably are going to be very close to each other, but where the guests are viewing, I don't want to create too much congestion in terms of footfall. I want everything to still flow quite nicely. So giving people the chance to stop here is something I just want to minimize at all costs. So here I'm just absolutely spamming the foliage, but knowing this game, the guest is still probably going to stop there and just look right through the foliage anyway. I did have guests in here the other day, and I was just sort of seeing how they behave with certain areas of the zoo, and oh god, the way that guests stop and just look through the foliage and look through walls is absolutely infuriating. I just don't understand why they've done it the way they have, but for the most part it functions pretty well. So, and then I end up dragging these temple little piles I've started building and putting them absolutely everywhere in this section as well. They don't actually affect the traversable area as much as I would thought it would have. I was a little bit worried going into this that the snow leopards wouldn't have enough space. The space requirement is in the orange, but it's like the high orange. So I've just sort of, I will admit, I've just sort of brushed it off. It probably wouldn't, you'd probably get protesters in franchise if you built this habitat, because A, the plants, and B, the space requirements is probably a little bit too stringent with it. But here I am with the snow pieces, and this is what I'm talking about. Like, I don't feel like you have to be particularly meticulous about where you place these. It's just something about when you're placing them, just if sinking them up and down, if that doesn't work, just rotate it a little bit, and eventually you'll find an angle that does actually work for this snow piece, especially when you're building in and amongst these rock temple piles that I've made. It just shows through so nicely, and you just, the little pops of white, I think it really does bring this habitat into its own in terms of theming, etc. And then here I'm using like faux rocks just again to break up the colors and the textures to keep it from all being very, very samey at the end of the day. And now you're probably looking at this and thinking this doesn't really fit with the rest of the sanctuary, but lore wise this probably would be the most recent addition to the sanctuary. So what I think I might end up doing is making a banner, putting like the grand opening or something on it, just to make it look like lore wise it's the most recent build in the sanctuary, because I get it, it is not as very in keeping with the rest of the sanctuary, but I think when you're building for a snow leopard and it's something so out of climate compared to everything else that you've been building for, I think you really do need to maybe find a caveat to it, and I think this is going to be our solution to it. We end up taking those tree guard things to stop them from climbing up the trees as well, especially this tree on the far left. I could easily see them climbing up that and getting out, but also making things not climbable aids in the frames per second of the sanctuary as well, just to make it a little bit more bearable for me. It is starting to become very tedious, so I am only hoping that there's 2 more cats to come. But from here on out, it really is just the detailing. So we end up finishing this platform here. Again, this is like an exclusive kind of view area that people that only buy the dome can actually do. And then, yeah, detailing. So cameras, I end up picking up some floodlights as well here. I noticed that some of the exterior of the building was still a little bit plain in areas. So we didn't have like some climb proofing along the front wall where the window is. So that gets done, and then I put some floodlights in. There was something else that I added in as well. I end up just, yeah, trim along the edge of the building. There's some like corners that don't have wooden posts and stuff like that. Just little trivial things that I knew that I had ignored because I just wanted to get the front of the building looking good. I didn't really care too much about the rear of the building because I knew that I'd be tackling it in this episode. But here's that like climb proofing just to stop the cats from being able to climb up onto the roof and escaping. Here is just the finishing of like the trim. Like I say, the corners here just didn't have anything on them, and then this wall I end up decorating with just a little bit of foliage and then covering it up again just to keep the walls from looking too boring and plain. So here, just going through these ivy pieces from the, I think it's a Twilight pack that he's got added in with. I need to start using more of these. I probably will do in the next project, so don't worry, I will be using them. They're absolutely amazing. I keep forgetting how amazing they look in terms of their 3D-ness. The ivy pieces we had from the get-go in the game don't really do it for me, but these ones definitely do look a lot nicer. Although saying that, when you mix in the old ivy with the new ivy, with the old ivy, it does look quite good. Not ivory, good lord. And then we move on to more detailing of like the pathing sort of areas. So I end up copying things like the lamp posts and stuff like that, just to just to make it all more cohesive. But I don't want to go too far, because obviously this is where our African leopards are going to be going at a later date when we find out when that's dropping. These trees as well, I've sort of fallen in love with them, and I've started using them in a hell of a lot of places. But yeah, back to the housekeeping. We're going to have a little look around P.A.W.S and what I've been up to in the week other than this exterior to the snow leopards. So this has been taking up a bulk of my time, and what we're currently looking at is the area coming down from the central gardens toward the jaguar. This is where we've got the lodge overlooking the cougar habitat. And this has just sort of been blending everything together. If you remember before, this has had like a round path, and then the path was very jagged. It was very hilly, leading down to the jaguar area. But obviously now with the announcement of the P.A.W.S cat and the African leopard, it's prompted me to get some of the pathing done in advance. So this area we've just cut across is going to be our P.A.W.S cat. And then this is like the main staff hub that I've then joined up with the rest of the sanctuary. So very, very cohesive, hopefully, as we move back toward this area. So this jaguar viewing still needs a lot of work. So this is going to be subject to heavy amounts of change at the end of the day. But up here, this is what I was talking about before, the staff area for the jaguars, and loads of little details here. So you've got like these scuff marks on the floor where the gate maybe drags on the floor a little bit. And then on the other side, we've got the indoor area, or the staff area for the Bengal tiger. So yeah, these have been paved over. Before, these were just paths leading up a dirt piece of terrain, but I've tried to make it tie in with everything, and it just looks a lot nicer than what it did before. And then this area on the right hand side that I'll be looking at in the moment, that's obviously going to be our Siberian tiger. That's going to be coming in the next episode. Yeah, it's going to have to be the Siberian tiger, because obviously we're still waiting on the African leopard and the P.A.W.S cat. So I do apologize that there's going to be two quite close tiger episodes, but yeah, this area in question that I'm walking at right now is going to be where our Siberian tiger is going to go. It's going to be some indoor areas, and then as we cut straight across, this sign back here is where our African leopard is going to be housed, and that is going to round everything all together in the end. The pathing got redone. Obviously, I've looped it all back around. You would have seen in the last episode what the plans were and what was going to go where, but I've gone through, I've terrain worked everything, so now all the paths have got like the right inclines that I want and stuff like that. So this should be it. This should be the final pathing layout when all things are said and done. And again, trying to keep this tower at the center of everything. It's such a good vista point. And that is going to be me for this episode. I'm going to leave you with some cinematics of the animals and of the habitat in general. But thanks so much for watching. Peace out.